like stop and frisk.
The policies he put into place ultimately brought down crime by 76% and murder in New York by 84%. Think of how many families these policies saved from the worst heartache imaginable. We need a national anti-crime agenda to make our cities safe again. We have to make our cities safe again.
Yesterday, he told Sean Hannity that he would call for a nationwide stop and frisk policy. Listen.
I would do stop and frisk. I think you have to. We did it in New York. It worked incredibly well. And you have to be proactive. And, you know, you really help people sort of change their mind automatically. You understand. You have to have, in my opinion, I see what's going on here. I see what's going on in Chicago. I think stop and frisk. In New York City, it was so incredible the way it worked. Now, we had a very good mayor, but New York City was incredible the way that worked. So I think that would be one step you could do.
Meantime, Hillary Clinton's campaign manager says she plans to develop national standards for police to prevent similar situations while investing in community policing. Here's the Democratic nominee.
We are safer when communities respect the police and police respect communities. I know I don't have all the answers. I don't know anyone who does. But this is certain. Too many people have lost their lives who shouldn't have. We need to come together, work together, white, black, Latino, Asian, all of us, to turn the tide, stop the violence, build the trust.
So both candidates, Steve, have put forward proposals in the wake of Charlotte. What do you make of them? What do we just laid them out?
Well, the first thing I think is that going national with this is not necessarily, I think, the right way to go. But before any discussion of this, I think it's really important for us all to say that policing is a really tough job. It's frightening for the police officers who put themselves at risk on our behalf. And I know that's a cliche, but we've got to keep reminding ourselves of that, even as we also say that it's evident now that a large group of people in our country are frightened of the police. And that is something that we can't just dismiss. We can't just fight back with statistics. We have to understand where that comes from. And I think the real answer here is actually the notion of community policing, but delivered not just through vague phrases like we heard there from Clinton, but it actually set out by Bill Bratton. Bill Bratton, who we all remember from New York, actually wrote a piece the other day in the New York Times that very clearly set out a plan for how you really build those bonds of trust between communities and the police. And it's very practical stuff. It's police officers spending time in the neighborhoods where they have to operate. And that just doesn't happen enough. And I think that the idea that you can impose this nationally,
which they're both talking about,
which they're both talking about. I just think that's almost what's gone wrong in a whole range of areas of policy where things have become too centralised, and the idea that big bureaucracies in Washington can solve every problem around the country. I think that's kind of what's gone wrong with a lot of areas of policy.
You're absolutely right. And when you talk about that one-size-fits-all nationalistic nannying policy, to me it smacks of militarization. And, you know, that's one thing that the rational people in these communities are actually protesting against, is what they see as the militarization of police. You don't see those people, the ones who are out looting, the ones who are out throwing photographers into a fire, the ones who are shooting each other. Those are not the ones who are having the discussion, and it's a discussion that absolutely has to be had. And you're absolutely right. You know, we talk about things like Common Core, these one-size-fits-all strategies, and when both candidates are saying the same thing, impose a national set of standards, that to me sounds like militarization.
Important to point out that Donald Trump was criticized for calling that, for that national stop and risk policy. He sort of walked those comments back, as you just heard, saying he was talking about Chicago, really.
Yeah, I mean, he did. He tried to emphasize the fact that he's talking about Chicago, where things have been very out of control in this one area specifically where police don't even really want to go. But, I mean, let's not forget that it was just last weekend that we had bombs exploding in New York, and it was the men in blue that went out and protected us from what was going on all around us when we had so much fear and had no idea where the next bomb was going to be. They're the ones that ran into the danger, and yet here they're being being criticized. You know, I mean, nobody is completely in the right on this issue, but to see it get so far out of control, Charlotte's a beautiful city. Now it's trashed. But everyone who had those businesses, now they've lost their jobs and their income.
Sorry, but that reminds me of something I think that's gone wrong that police officers would agree with, which is that they get too much bureaucracy imposed on them that actually gets in the way of them.
Gotta
doing
let
what
them
they
do their
want to
job.
do,
That's a great point.
Which is just be there with the people that they're protecting.
Yes, and support them.
Stop. I worry that all these proposals will end up with more of that, not less.
Well, and what we've seen in Chicago just in the last couple of days is they are now cozying up to the idea of a de-escalation program for police officers. And what would that look like exactly when they have so many dozens of murders each weekend? Across the summer, it's just been a very bloody summer. I'm just calling it what it is.
They talked about that in New York. Remember?
Yeah,
you know, they
so
were asking NYPD officers to act as psychologists.
Right. Yeah, and we're putting so much on them. We're asking them to, you know, get to a scene, but then kind of hold back. But what's interesting about what you said about Bratton, I believe he's working with Hillary Clinton through one of her subsidiaries, right? So he might be able to give her some of that information. Yeah. I'll tell you where the conversation has not gone. A black police officer kills a black man. And that's not the first time it's happened. So are we now talking about a broader issue of abuse of power by some bad apples in these police departments? And isn't it incumbent upon all of us, no matter what we look like, to find those people, whomever they are, because then everybody's a target. The weakest among us will always be a target of those who abuse power.
I think that's right, and I completely agree. And there's another aspect to what you said, which is that we're putting too much on them. We're also expecting the police to pick up the pieces of the economic and social failure in so many communities around the country. It's not their job to solve these problems that have been with us for so long.
And to act as social workers. Right. And if you talk to police officers, if you do a ride-along, that's essentially what they're being tasked with. And, you know, to your point, you make a really good point, because we have these two massive events within the course of just a couple of days, and they involve law enforcement. And we have to ask ourselves as a society, no matter where you live, no matter what your background, what do you expect from law enforcement? Right. And I think most people would agree, you know, please help keep us safe from terrorism.
Equally as important, what do they expect from us? So when you get stopped by a police officer, are people teaching their children, no matter what they look like, what economic status they are, when a police officer tells you to do something, and you want to get through that moment and have recourse perhaps at a due time, do it.
So, Steve, let me ask you, are we having the right conversations then? I mean, both candidates are talking about doing something at the national level, which you say you're against. But Hillary Clinton said she's planning on these national standards for police intended to prevent situations like this. But she talks about restoring bonds between communities and law enforcement and investing in community policing. Is there any one proposal from the candidates that you're hearing that you favor more?
Not really. I think that those are fine words. I kind of agree with those words, but then how's it going to happen? I think the idea that you can make that happen from Washington with a national policy is ridiculous and actually counterproductive. That's why I point to what Bratton wrote, because he has done it in multiple cities across America, and he set out a very pragmatic, practical plan for making it happen. But I think the right way is for each police force to look at that and say, well, how can we do that kind of thing in our area? Not to have it imposed on them from politicians miles away who don't understand the needs of that community.
Great perspective. All right, thank you. New Fox News polling, meanwhile, showing Donald Trump pulling ahead in 3 key battleground states, as another poll shows Hillary Clinton's lead shrinking nationally. Should her campaign be worried? Plus, we're now just days away from the start of the White House's plan to bring in 110,000 more refugees. But one major state threatening to drop out of the resettlement program as leaders sound the alarm about the security threat. And after the show, you can join our live chat by clicking on the Overtime tab at foxnews.com/outnumbered.
Happened in Charlotte. And what her vision is for going forth, how involved she may be in all of what's going on in terms of adjudicating any cases that may be there. We know that one person was shot last night by a civilian, we're told, among the protesters, and some things that others are calling what looks like rioting, and definitely some looting and a lot of violence. So Loretta Lynch expected to step up to the lectern and tell us about that ahead of her remarks with the mass mail scheme that is a global initiative that she's working on. We'll watch for that, bring you the news out of that when it happens. A close race, just 50 days from Election Day. And now, actually less than that. And now, new Fox News polling shows Donald Trump is leading Hillary Clinton in 3 key battleground states. In a two-way race, Trump now ahead by 5 points among likely voters in Ohio. up 4 points in Nevada, 5 points in North Carolina, and a new NBC News Wall Street Journal poll shows Hillary Clinton is leading nationally by just 6 points among likely voters. That's down from a lead of 9 among registered voters last month. This could point to trouble, since likely voters are, well, more likely to actually go to the polls. That's why they called them that. And now Clinton is openly asking why she does not have much bigger leads in the polling. Here's part of what she told labor leaders during a video conference yesterday.
Now, having said all this, why aren't I 50 points ahead, you might ask? Well, the choice for working families has never been clearer. I need your help to get Donald Trump's record out to everybody. Nobody should be fooled.
That's
wow.
Wow.
Okay.
What's up with
Video
that?
conferencing is difficult because it's just you and the camera.
You got to raise the energy levels.
And so you're trying to like pump up the energy.
Yeah.
I would just preface it by saying that. You know,
Sounds like an ostrich with a belt around its neck.
As you're watching this race, Steve, I'm just curious to get your point. Everybody says they tighten.
Yeah.
But this is getting uncomfortable, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting is the complete way in which on the left they can't understand it. They can't believe this is happening. When you talk to Democrats and think, what is going on? How could they possibly support him? And how could it be that it's so close? And I think that there was some new information published last week that gives us a really important clue into what's going on. So last week we had new data published on incomes. And a lot of people were celebrating because for the first time in many years, incomes went up. And it's true that they went up last year. But also in that same data was the fact that the median income of America was lower than in 1999. What that means in plain English is that half of all Americans, 50%, earn less today than in 1999.
Wow.
So we've had 8 years of Bush, 8 years of Obama, and they're earning less. And that's what's going on here, because people are saying it doesn't matter who you vote for the last few years. Nothing's got better for me. The rich have got richer. We might as well try anything. And Trump looks like he's an outsider that might actually change things.
Yeah,
and I think that is what's going on.
Fascinating. Melissa?
In addition to that, if you look underneath those numbers that we showed you at the top, it's the independents where he's really killing her. And I was surprised by this. I mean, the contrast is stark. You look in Nevada, he leads independents 42% over 23, 21 points.
Yeah.
Look also in Ohio, he's up by 20 points among independents. And in North Carolina, he's up by 14 points among independents. Those are the swing voters. Those are the people, like you said, who are saying, you know what? I don't care which party's in. They're both screwing me.
Yes.
Then my question would be about the intensity. What do we know about independent voters? Because I think you kind of coined a phrase here, we'll try anything. Will they try actually going to the polls?
Well, I think that there's a lot of, well, it's clear that there's much more enthusiasm on Trump's side. I think that they will, because they're so frustrated. We actually saw this in the Brexit vote. Not long ago in the UK, where all the models and the data that the people who were campaigning to stay in the EU were using missed out on a whole group of voters who are just so alienated from the whole thing because they don't think anything ever changes, who did show up because they thought, finally, here's something that actually might make a difference, and we can really
Oh my gosh,
have
you
a say.
just hit on something else, Kennedy, and I was having a dinner conversation with a complete stranger who was seated next to me yesterday.
Yeah, that's how you do it.
He said, which stranger, right?
What is that,
that
baby?
stranger danger card. No, he was a very nice man. But we were talking about which polling you trust, and he said, well, I'm an independent. I don't think you should trust any of it because I don't do polls. I'm independent. I'm going to poll.
But that's what we have right now.
Yeah.
But that's what we have right now. And when you go, fair point on the economy. Are people better off now than they were 8 years ago? Or you said
16 years
16 years ago, 1999. That's unbelievable information. But how much of this is about national security and our fears over whether or not we're safe here at home? I mean, look at the happenings just in recent weeks and the tightening that we're seeing in these polls.
I think that's right. I think that a really, really big part of why people vote the way they do is an instinctive sense of who is the stronger candidate. I think strength is just a really big factor in elections and in the way people judge candidates. And I do think that there's something about the way Trump presents himself, and people can disagree with the content of what he says, but just the way he comes over does project a certain strength. And I think people respond to that at a time when they're frightened of what's going on in the world and at home.
Quickly, I think the economy is foundational for people. I think think that is the one issue that doesn't change, certainly in this election. And then you have the other things that we fixate on. Some of them are momentary, like scandals, and others, like national security, they are important, but still, I think the bottom line is the economy. And the thing I will say about Hillary Clinton is she still has not figured out how to talk to independent voters. And that's why she's hemorrhaging millennials. They are finding Gary Johnson and Jill Stein to be more attractive candidates for them. And she can't hold on to a constituency that should be naturally hers. So between millennials and independents, she's kind of tone deaf.
Well, screaming into that video camera. I want to remind everybody, in case they're just tuning in, former strategic advisor to Prime Minister David Cameron, when you talk about Brexit, you know what you're talking about.
Yes, and he didn't like the way I was talking about it, because we ended up on different sides.
What did you think of his comparison to Brexit and this election, and how everybody thought it was going to go one way, and it certainly didn't? Is that a fair comparison?
I think it is, because I think, funnily enough, it's the same kind of underlying sense that people have, which is they're so sick of these politicians who make promises and nothing really changes in their lives, and they feel that there's a group at the centre, the kind of elite, the technocrats, the bureaucrats, who run things irrespective of what happens in elections, and they're really angry about it. They've had it for decades, and that's what's being expressed, and I think that's the comparison between the two.
Steve Hilton, it's great to have you.
Great to be here.
Yeah, get that perspective, right? New details coming in on the...
All right, well, with just 4 days until the first presidential debate, the candidates taking starkly different approaches to how they will prepare. Unlike Donald Trump, who's taking a more low-key approach and plans to campaign through Saturday, Hillary Clinton clearing her schedule of any campaign events before Monday's big showdown, as she hunkers down with her strategist and briefing books. This as her campaign says it fears debate moderators will lower the bar for the GOP nominee, and that it has happened in the past. Clinton's communications chief, Jennifer Palmieri.
I understand that the press have a difficulty in dealing with a very unconventional candidate, as I would describe, but I think you can't lower the bar in your questions in terms of how difficult they are, how much they expect in terms of the candidate's knowledge, or being able to answer questions about their plans, or being able to answer questions about how they would approach different problems. You can't lower the bar because their own experience and their own policies don't meet the bar of hers, and that's what we're concerned about.
Do you think that that's a possibility?
Let's talk about that. Meantime, Team Trump mocking the links Hillary is going to in preparing for Monday's debate. A campaign memo obtained by the Wall Street Journal saying Mr. Trump won't be spending hours in the film room like an NFL player, but will be himself at the debate. And in what could be a first, Trump seeking debate advice from his supporters in an online survey. Among the questions, should he refer to Clinton as Crooked Hillary during that debate, and whether he should go after her for refusing to say radical Islamic terrorism. All right, Steve, you were almost in disbelief when you heard Jennifer Palmieri saying that one of their biggest fears is that they're going to tone down the questions for Trump.
The way she said it, look, both camps are going to be trying to do spin in advance of it. That's normal. We expect that. But that was just so patronising, wasn't it? Just the way...
Intentionally so, though.
She did it. But I think it's a bit like the basket of deplorables. It reveals what they really think. I think they genuinely think he's just not very smart, not very clever, and just an idiot who doesn't understand anything about politics. And I think that that's part of the reason he's been underestimated by the political establishment for so long. But the thing I'd say about this debate and the preparation is that I think a lot of people in politics make the mistake of thinking that knowledge of policy and policy detail is the crucial thing. I think when it
she's
comes
hoping
to,
for
yeah,
that.
exactly.
I think that's what she's banking on.
Having worked alongside a prime minister and been in government, the truth is that you can have all the policy plans you want before an election, before getting into office. But once you're there, a huge part of the job is actually responding to unpredictable future things that come your way. And that's not about your policies. That's about your character, what you're like, your basic values. And in the end, I think that's what voters will be judging the candidates on. And to be honest, therefore, if he doesn't know all the details of every policy, but comes across as the kind of person you want sitting in the Oval Office to deal with what the world may throw at America I think that is what will be the crucial factor.
I also think that with Matt Lauer, her campaign got a win. And so what they're doing is they're setting up Lester Holt to repeat Matt Lauer's performance. And if they had known ahead of time that Matt Lauer was going to be tougher on Hillary Clinton, then she would have liked from NBC News, because it really hurt her feelings when he stepped on her piggy toes asking questions about the email server. They're hoping that Lester Holt does the exact same thing, which, you know, I can't imagine that he will. He's kind of style.
Steve, one thing that you kind of hit on the nail on the head with for me was that it's not about the policy, particularly when it comes to things that are unfolding right now, like terrorism in America. They want to know who is going to react first with what they're looking for that seems like leadership. Hillary Clinton has come at us with 2 different reactions to what happened over the weekend, and they were not exactly the same.
Yeah. You know, Monica Crowley wrote a great piece about the debate prep addressing that very question in the Washington Times, and she said rather than going back at Hillary Clinton, you know, on point about policy and getting trapped into, like you say, you know, sort of a fight on the details, he's better saying, we've tried it your way. I mean, this is your way. This has not worked out. So if you want more of this and what's going on in the world, great. I'm going to try something different.
I mean, they are definitely managing expectations ahead of that debate. Do you think that's going to be a big turning point? This is the moment in the campaign?
It can be a turning point, and then you can turn back. I mean, if you look at some of the history, for example, I think Reagan in the 84 campaign had a disastrous first debate and turned it around in the second debate.
Same with President Obama in 2012 against Mitt Romney. He lost the first one, but then came back.
Terrible.
Yeah.
All right. Well, the White House getting major pushback over its plan to increase the number of refugees